Hello, 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 and welcome to week 12 of Intro to Creative Web Dev. This week is some new material-ish. We're going to be learning about if statements in JavaScript, but to do that, really what I'm going to do is kind of smush together two things that you have already learned about. So last week you learned about JavaScript and adding JavaScript code to your web page to make it sort of interactive and to like run code on your web page. And so that's the foundation of like vanilla JavaScript. And I'm going to take that and I'm going to smush it together with what you learned about way back in week 4, which was if statements in P5, P5.js. So you learned about if statements in P5, and like spoiler alert, P5 is JavaScript. So you actually already know how to write if statements in JavaScript. So rather than trying to throw a bunch of new concepts at you, I'm going to kind of review the existing concepts and then kind of combine them and build on them. So we'll see how it goes. Let's dive in. So rather than, I don't know, throw a bunch of theory at you, I'm just going to go directly to Replit and start coding something. So I'll create a new project, new HTML, call it like if statements. And that's going to give me my sort of coding environment here. And I have my default content that I'm going to get rid of. And I'll maybe move this up to the head section just to get it out of the way. And you know what? I think that's probably good enough. So now I have my Hello World web page, and I'm going to click Run. And there we go. I've got Hello World here. Beautiful, wonderful, amazing. And I can add JavaScript to it using the techniques that we found, or that we talked about earlier or last week. So maybe I'll add like an input element, planning ahead. I don't know. Maybe I'll say like, what's the temperature? And maybe I'll have an input, input ID equals temperature. And maybe I'll, just for funsies, I'll give it a type of number just to play around with that. And is that all I need? No, I need like maybe a button. So maybe I'll put some new lines here just to get something working. And I'll say button on click equals, I'll just say submit for now. And then I'll say submit, sure. Okay, so now I've got my HTML. I'm going to save this and run it. And okay, I've got what's the temperature and an input here where I can enter in a number and then a submit button. Right now the submit button doesn't actually do anything because I haven't actually defined this submit function yet. Is that going to be an error message over here? Yeah. So I've talked about this in a couple of videos and in a couple of one-offs, but I just want to draw your attention to the JavaScript console. Whenever you are encountering a situation where you're like not sure why your code isn't working or why it's not doing what you expected, the first thing you should do is check out your JavaScript console. So there's a few ways to get to it. You can right click and inspect and then go to the console tab here. Or you can go up here to the 3-dot menu and go to more tools and developer tools here, and then console shows up there. However you want to get to it is all good, but I generally try to look there first. I'll close it now just because I don't have a lot of screen space here, but I wanted to call that out right at the top. So if something's not working how you expect it to, go check out your JavaScript console. Anyway, I'm back here in my code editor and I have a submit button, but I don't have a submit function yet. So I'm going to go define that over in script.js, function submit. And in here, maybe just to get something working, I'll say like console.log hello. And this is really just to make sure that everything's all connected. So if I open up my JavaScript console here, maybe I'll clear this out just to clear out all the old messages. Now I click submit, and now I see hello is printed. So okay, cool. I'm getting closer and closer. All right, so next what I want to do is maybe I'll get the element, this, what did I call this, temperature element? Yeah, ID of temperature, and then I'll get its value. Sure, maybe I'll do that in one line actually, just to demonstrate how that would work. So I say let temperature equals document.get element by ID temperature. that gives me the element, and I want to get the value from the element, so then I'm going to say dot value. I could do this in 2 lines, and that's what I did last week, but you can also do it in 1 line, so I'm going to do it this way. This is gross. Good enough. I guess that can be really tiny. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. Okay. So anyway, I've got my temperature here, and I could maybe I'll log this console.log temperature just to see if that's working. So I'll open up my JavaScript console and maybe I'll clear it out and I'll hit, fill this out like 34. Submit. Okay, 34 is submitted. 78, submit. And okay, cool, that's working. So I know I'm getting the value properly. And now I want to actually do something with it. So maybe I'll go back to my index.html and maybe I'll give myself a p tag with an ID of, I'll just call it output for now. And all of this should be kind of a review of what we covered last week. So I'm going to kind of fly through it, but hopefully it is making sense. If not, please, please, please let me know. So next I'm going to say, I'm going to set the text of that element, and I'm actually going to split this one into a couple of lines just because I think it's going to make my life a little easier in a minute. So I'll say let output element equals document.get element by ID output. And now I can say output element dot inner text equals the temperature is, and I'll just add the temperature. I'll just append the temperature to that string. And formatting is always my enemy, but let's see if this works. So I'm going to save that, and I'm going to say, what's the temperature? It's 73 degrees, and I'm going to hit submit. And I see the temperature is 73. I could maybe format that to be like 73 degrees, but whatever. So this is JavaScript. This is DOM manipulation and getting input from the user and then outputting something to the user. This example isn't all that interesting because we're just taking a value and then directly outputting it to the page, but this is JavaScript. This is what we learned about last week. And now what I want to do is bring back the idea of if statements that you already learned about many moons ago back in week 4. So back in week 4, we were learning in the P5 environment. And I did that because I don't know, I just like P5. I think it's kind of fun and interesting and like making things that are animated and visual. That seems like a better way to get started. But the entire time that you were learning P5, you were actually learning JavaScript. So everything that you learned about back in P5 land is still true. So when you learned about Booleans, that's still the case in JavaScript. When you learned about like the AND operator or the syntax for if statements, all of that still true because this is written in JavaScript's syntax. P5 gives you certain functions like the background function or the circle function, but the syntax itself is the same. So what that means is I can write an if statement in JavaScript using that exact same syntax. So to sort of summarize, to write an if statement, what I do is I type the if keyword, and then inside of parentheses, I'm going to create a Boolean expression, which is usually like an inequality or like checking the value of something against another value. So I can do something like if temperature is less than 32, then I'll do something. So maybe I'll say output element dot inner text equals burr. So it's cold, and maybe for now I'll just say that's the only thing I can do. So let's run this and see what happens. See if this actually works. So if I type in like 23 and I click submit, I see burr because it's cold. If I type in, let me refresh actually. Let me run again and I'll type like 98 and I click submit, and now nothing is happening. Because if you read through the code line by line, what's happening when I click submit. The submit function is called. First, I get the temperature from the input. So I get the 98. I store it in the temperature value or the temperature variable. Then I get the element with an ID of output, which is that little p tag that's down at the bottom of my page. And I store that element in a variable called output element. Next, I check if the temperature, which is the value that I typed into here, is less than 32, then I set the inner text of that output element. If it's not less than 32, so if it's 32 or more, then I just skip this line of code and I don't do anything. So I'm not setting the inner text. So I can expand on this using the exact same kinds of things that you learned about in the P5 if statements week. So I can, for example, use an else statement here. So maybe I'll say if it's less than 32 else it's warm. I don't know. I don't have good ideas here, but and actually here's an opportunity to maybe talk about something else. So right now I'm getting this red squiggly line, and if I run my code, probably it'll break, and probably it won't work, and yeah, I'll probably have an error message in here, and yeah, things are breaking, and that's because I tried to write a string with a single quotation mark. I tried to write some text with a single quotation mark, and that's a problem because you use single quotation marks around your text to indicate that it is text. So what do you do if there's a single quotation mark inside of your text? Well, you can switch it to double quotation marks. It's all good. And both will work. It's all good. So now my if statement is if temperature is less than 32, then the inner text of my output element will become burr, and otherwise it'll be it's warm. So now I'm going to check this out. I'm going to try this out. I'm going to say, oh, the temperature is 12, so burr. Okay, never mind. The temperature is actually 98. So submit this, and there it is. It's warm. And I could add styling and stuff to this, and maybe I'll do that in a second. But the idea is that the syntax for an if statement is the same as what you have already learned about. So all of the same rules apply. So one more thing to go over is, so I have an if and I have an else, but right now my distinction is kind of, arbitrary. If it's 33 degrees, I would argue that it's not warm. It's a little bit subjective, but I would like to maybe add some more cases in here. So I can use an else if statement, which again, you learned about in week 4. So I can say else if, maybe I'll say like if it's between 32, temperature is less than, so if it's between 32 and say, I don't know, 50-ish maybe, I don't know, it's up to you. What would you categorize as the next sort of temperature band? So instead of burr, I'll say it's a little chilly. It's a little chilly, and I still have the same problem here. So another thing I can do, this is kind of just a random side note, is I have the same problem where I have this single quotation mark. I could change these to double quotation marks. Another thing I can do is add a backslash before my quote, and it'll just kind of use it as the character quote and not the like special character quote. Anyway, so now I have 3 cases, so I'm kind of disambiguating them. So I can run this and say, okay, if it's 12 degrees, then burr. If it's more than 32 but less than 50, so if it's like, I don't know, 45 degrees, then I say it's a little chilly. And I can keep expanding on that. I can say if it's 67, then I'm going to say it's warm. So maybe I'll just add like one more case, and I'll say else if temperature is less than, I don't know, 75, then I'll say, here's where I'll say it's warm actually, and otherwise I'll say it's hot. Okay, so now I have my if statement with a few if, else, like following statements. So I can run this, and let's test out some options. So if it's 11 degrees out, burr. If it is 45 degrees out, it's a little chilly. If it is 60 degrees out, then it's warm. and if it is 80 degrees out, then it's hot. And hopefully none of that was like new and shocking to you. The stuff that's new is more like the idea of combining things together. So combining the idea of JavaScript and getting input and doing like output, providing output to the web page, and if statements, like smushing all of that together, that itself is new. But the syntax is old news. You would have already seen this in week 4, so hopefully it's not too shocking. You might have forgotten like the exact details, but hopefully it is coming back to you pretty quick. So from here, there's a couple things I could talk about. One is the idea of like adding styling and stuff with JavaScript. The other is I have forgotten, so maybe it wasn't important. No, it's okay. I remember now. I was going to talk about like what's the point? What does all of this mean? Why do I need this? And if statements, well, first of all, JavaScript helps you make your page interactive, and it helps like if you want something to, I don't know, move around on the screen, or if you want something to happen when the user clicks a button or types a key or things like that. If you want your page to be interactive, which pretty much every page these days is interactive, then you'll use JavaScript. And so that's kind of step one. Now, step two is you probably don't want to always do the exact same thing whenever the user does something. So you probably don't want to, I don't know, do like if you're asking the user for input, you probably want to do something with that input and maybe do one thing if the input is one thing and a different thing if the input is different thing. Or you could change like what the web page shows based on like external things, like based on like the time, for example, or you know, really anything that you can get in JavaScript. You might want to, you know, differentiate your web page with those kinds of things. Anyway, I'm kind of rambling, but the whole point I'm trying to make here is that the reason I'm talking about if statements is because they're one of the like fundamental building blocks of making your code behave in different ways based on like the state of things. So in this case, I asked the user for the temperature, but in other cases you might do other things. So I don't know. I didn't plan this part ahead, but like if I go to weather, this is sort of an interactive display that instead of like asking me for the weather, this web page goes and gets the actual weather and shows different things based on the value. And somewhere in this code base, I promise, there are if statements. And that's kind of why we're talking about them. Okay, so I don't know, maybe I should have mentioned at the very beginning, but that's kind of the why behind why we are talking about if statements. The last thing I want to talk about is the idea of like adding styling. This is, you can consider this maybe a bonus. So if you're sick of watching this video, I get it. But if you're curious about like how to kind of expand on this, another thing you can do instead of just outputting some text to the screen is like change the styling. So I don't know, maybe I will change like the background color, maybe. And yeah, let's go with that. A bunch of things I could do, but let me just change the styling of like the background. So maybe I'll say, first I want to get, I don't know, maybe the body element. I could choose maybe just the output, the output element. So if I say like 4 degrees, maybe I could make this like blue if it's cold or like red if it's hot. But I think I'm going to try to change the entire page's background color. Maybe that'll be fun. Maybe that'll be fun. So I want to get the element with the body element in my JavaScript. And how do I do that? So I'm going to type into a search engine something like JavaScript get. Maybe I'll just say get body element. Let's see if that gives me any promising results. So I could do document.body, looks like, or you can do document.get elements by tag name body. Sure, I think I'm going to go with this one. It looks like either one will work. I think this one is a little bit more general, so you can get kind of any element. So let me go with this. So that will give me the body. So I'll say maybe up here, I'll say actually, let me just paste that whole thing. So I'll say let body element equals document.get elements by tag name. Looks like that was the function I was looking for. And then it takes a parameter of body, which is the name of the tag itself. Okay. And since there can be multiple elements with the same tag name, so like I have a bunch of BRs here, a couple of P tags, looks like I need to give it like an index here, 0. Okay, cool. So now I have the body element, and now I want to maybe set the background of an element, of the body element, in my JavaScript. So now I'm going to go back to my search engine, and I'm going to say like JavaScript, I don't know, set background color of element, maybe. And sure, let's go with this. So now I have, looks like they use document.body, but I don't think it matters. So it looks like I'm looking for like .style.background equals a color. And yeah, it looks like that's kind of like HTML colors. All right, cool, cool, cool. So inside of my if statements, I can maybe say, in addition to outputting some text, maybe I'll say body element .style.background equals, maybe I'll just say blue to start with. So now I'm going to say the temperature is 4 degrees, submit, and now it's blue. That's probably a little dark. Now I can't really see anything, but that's okay. Maybe I'll try cyan instead for submit. You know, that's a little better. Okay, cool. And I can do the same thing in each of my if statements. And so maybe I'll skip it's a little chilly. Maybe I'll say it's warm is like yellow, and it's hot is red, maybe. Or maybe it's a little chilly gets to be, I don't know. Maybe I'll make that one blue. It doesn't really matter. You can play with that and try a bunch of different things, but I'm just going to get something working. So what's the temperature? It's 4 degrees out. I get burr, and my page is now has this like cyan background. If I say it's 45 degrees, now I see that blue. Again, don't love the blue because it's a little dark and I can't really see anything, but that's all right. It's just an example. So let me go with like 60 degrees, submit. Now it's yellow, and maybe if I go all the way up to like 99, I can submit that, and it's red. So you see, this is how you start making your pages like interactive and changing things based on the state of the world, the state of your web page. So you might imagine like showing different things to different people, for example. Okay, so I've been rambling for a while, but the takeaways here are you already know how to do if statements in P5. If you don't quite remember the syntax, that's totally fine. You can use examples in W3 Schools and the tutorials on my webpage to sort of remind yourself of that. But the idea is you know how to do that in P5, and you can kind of refresh your memory if you need to. And you know how to write JavaScript, which does things like get elements from the page and changes elements on the page. And you know how to do that. Okay, cool. And now you know that you can do both. You can combine them. So you can write if statements in JavaScript, which will make decisions in your code and then let you do things in JavaScript, just like changing the output of the page or changing a style of an element or updating some value. Anything you can do in JavaScript, you can do inside of an if statement in JavaScript. Okay, so those are your takeaways. Hopefully that makes some amount of sense. This is a little bit experimental, to be honest with you. I am trying to rely on stuff you learned in P5 to use in JavaScript, so maybe it's a little weird. I'm open to feedback, but hopefully that made sense. All right, that was if statements in JavaScript through the lens of if statements in P5. So thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one where we actually we use this code to create a project. All right, see you in that one.